We're going to now move on to our next session where we have four, and it moves on very naturally, four amazing speakers. Tracie, who we've just heard from, who is the founder and chief executive of the Pivot Fund and a very, very, very honored Harvard Shorenstein fellow. Daniel Ash, who is Associate Vice President of Community Impact at the Chicago Community Trust. In the UK, the community foundations, and they're represented here today, are quite small. In the US, they're enormous. Daniel was also worked for Chicago Public Media, where he hugely drove individual income. So could touch on that, Daniel, as well. Padma, who we've been hearing from a little bit, is based in Hyderabad in India and is the co-founder and editor-in-chief of the most incredible Suno India podcast platform, which she'll tell us about. And Vince Stehle, who I'm so excited to hear, runs this unique thing, which we need here in the UK as well, which is an organization that brings together all the funders that fund media and encourages them and supports them and enables them to fund more. Oh, and the theme of this session, is all around how can we get more grants, major donors, impact investment, institutional fundraising into our organizations to scale impact media in the UK particularly. Tracie.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I'm honored to be here. Seamus, I live in North Georgia, about 40 minutes from Atlanta. We don't have alligators. We have bobcats, we have feral cats, we have chickens, lots of chickens, but no alligators. It's closer to South Georgia, closer to Florida. We try to keep them down that way. I want to talk a little bit about myself, just a tiny bit. My background is quite different from most folks in this space. I started off in circulation and advertising. I have probably worked in every department in the newspaper. I even slung ink in the press room. So I know the newspaper, I know the news business better than I know the back of my hand. I worked my way up, and I somehow found my way in the philanthropic sector of media, and really worked on one of the first mapping projects to map the media ecosystem or the journalism ecosystem in the country, along when I was a senior fellow with Democracy Fund. That really gave me kind of a up close, embedded view of what was happening in the landscape. And I won't belabor it because we've already talked about how the industry is kind of changing, and the number of newspapers that are going out of business have gone out of business. We have hedge funds that now own a number of our newspapers, news organizations that have changed hands several times, that have contracting and laying off journalists left and right. And we saw all of this happening. And so in the nonprofit sector, we understood that philanthropy would have to step up and fill the gap. The urgency for that has quickened or hastened because of the level of disinformation flowing around in our current information system. And so philanthropy now understands more than ever that we have to not only reach communities directly with credible, quality news and information, but also try to figure out how to stamp down the flow of disinformation in our information economy. So I launched what has become known as the Racial Equity and Journalism Fund at Borealis Philanthropy. I did that about 2 or 3 years ago. I wrote a white paper kind of setting up that fund. And then I led it out of the gate, and we invested about $7 million into 30 independent news organizations run by and for communities of color. Why communities of color? Communities of color are at the forefront of the barrage of disinformation. We also had George Floyd murdered, and that helped a lot of philanthropists understand that they needed to invest in equity, racial equity in particular. And that meant flowing dollars into some of these news outlets that were already embedded in these communities of color that had been traditionally ignored or have been targets of harmful information from status quo news organizations. And then COVID happened. And so that happened right after I released the first pool of dollars to these outlets. And right as I released those dollars, advertisers began canceling their run dates with these newspapers. So the money actually came right on time, and we realized once again, philanthropy stepped up and said we needed to provide emergency dollars to a lot of the independent, especially independent community news outlets out there serving their community. So we did that. Very quickly, soon after that, I learned that we also needed to provide capacity dollars to these organizations. We needed to help them figure out how to add capacity in really smart and strategic ways. And we also needed to provide technical and legal support. So we raised dollars for that as well. Last May, I left Borealis, and pretty soon I was being inundated by phone calls from news outlets saying, we need your coaching, your mentoring, we need the technical support and capacity building support to continue. How can we get help around development to bring in the fundraising dollars? How can we, we need help in organizational design. Who should we hire first? Who should we hire second? Who should we hire third? We need access to tools. We need to understand how to use data better. So I knew right away that there was this huge need, and the Pivot Fund was born to help fulfill that need. The Pivot Fund disrupts and reimagines the journalism industry, ensuring equity for BIPOC-led community organizations and the BIPOC communities they serve. Since the journalism industry is far from BIPOC-led, a fund that is BIPOC-owned and is led is crucial. The fund helps fight disinformation that disproportionately affects people of color by investing in trusted, culturally competent, and that's really important, culturally competent news outlets. The organizations that the Pivot Fund supports do not just write about BIPOC communities, they write for them. I'm happy to talk a little bit about how we work. So we target our communities of color. That's our center communities, because that's not traditionally what has happened in status quo journalism. We want to understand how those communities consume information, what kinds of information they need, and what kinds of information would help them be more informed and engaged in this great experiment we call a democracy. We employ a unique approach as we work alongside our grantees, setting them up for long-term sustainability. While funders in this space typically focus on operations funding, the Pivot Fund recognizes that programmatic funding and collaboration opportunities are vital to ensuring BIPOC-led newsrooms have the full range of resources needed to grow and succeed. We specialize in grant making, capacity building, and technical support, as well as strategic consulting to donors, funders, and trade associations. So we are a pooled fund, and forgive me if you already know what that means, but we accept dollars from a wide-ranging array of institutional investors like foundations, but we also accept dollars from high wealth individuals. One of the things I'm most excited about is that, with our recent launch, we had quite a good showing from grassroots supporters of this. So we know that it's needed, and we know that it's wanted. I think that a lot of what a lot of these independent news outlets and BIPOC communities in particular see and understand is that for a very, very long time, they have not had the same kinds of equitable access to information that their white counterparts have had. And so they want this information. They need this information. They understand this. And so they turn to the folks that in their community who they know and who they trust. These are outlets that are seen again as part of the community, as, dare I say, community advocates. They don't advocate for political agendas or candidates, but they do advocate for their community. They amplify the voices of these community members. And so that's why they're so trusted. I think in all my work that I've done in journalism, I've learned startups are great, and I will invest in some startups, but the journey is shorter when you invest in existing organizations that are already engaged in trusted relationships with the community. It's just a shorter journey between A to B. And the need is now, it's urgent that we reach these communities, that we become better informed and better equipped to kind of handle the barrage of news that we're being pounded with, to better understand what the meaning is behind all of this stuff. And then, and quite frankly, how do we, and I think Adam hit on this earlier, the solutions. What are the solutions? What are the tools at our own disposal that we can use to kind of shape our own communities and respond effectively to some of the stuff that we're being hit with? Caroline told me I had 8 minutes, and I'll probably use up all of that right now.
Oh, again, I could listen to you all day, Tracie. I'm going to have to get you back as well if you can. Thank you so much. It's absolute privilege to hear you talk and your deep understanding of the need for this kind of media. A quick question from me first. Where did you get the initial funding from? And where are you getting it from for the pivot?
Excuse me.
Because I know that we would love an equivalent fund here in the UK. So just how did you start it?
So I was blessed to have some initial dollars from a private family foundation. And then one of the things I told you, we do the consulting piece. So we have done a couple of consulting jobs, and that's been really cool. We've had some more money from a family foundation. We're talking to all the institutional and typical traditional institutional investors, but what we are also doing differently, if you will, is that we're really raising awareness with place-based donors and donors of color about why they should care about this sector, why they should care and invest in journalism, why they should care about the disinformation happening, taking place in their communities. And so that's where the Pivot Fund is kind of like our sweet spot, I guess, because our organizations are embedded in communities, the same communities that these local foundations are located in and are trying to support. So we're really fortunate to occupy that kind of gap that has been not overlooked, but just hasn't been fully tapped by other organizations.
Fantastic. Well, there is another question for you, but we're going to move now to the next speaker so we fit all four of you in, and then hopefully we'll have a bit of time for Q&A afterwards as well. So stay with us, Tracie. Can you stay with us?
Yes.
Yes, great, lovely. Because we're now going to move to Daniel Oash, who is based in Chicago, where obviously one of the wealthiest cities in the world. Very different to some of the communities you're funding, Tracie, I'm sure, and supporting with your capacity building. Daniel.
Good morning to you all from Chicago. It's currently 0 degrees, wind chill 14 below zero. So it's cold, and I'm stuck in my basement where I've been since COVID. So I have my sweatshirt on, so excuse the informalness. Before I begin, actually, I want to acknowledge my colleague, Lauren Woods, is also on the Zoom call, and she's my comrade helping to stand up to the media program at the Chicago Community Trust. So actually my remarks is actually easy to do because everything that Tracie's trying to do with the Pivot Fund is what we're trying to do at the Trust. And one of my favorite grant recipients actually already presented, Seamus from Black Club Chicago. So you've already sort of been exposed to examples of what we're trying to do at the Chicago Community Trust. Let me do a couple of things just to level set. As Caroline said, I am Associate VP at the Chicago Community Trust. The Chicago Community Trust is a community foundation. And what that means for my international colleagues is that we're place-based. So we're a philanthropy that works with many donors, not one donor, but many donors who commit their philanthropy to Chicago. We've been around for 106 years now, and I joined the trust, it's hard to believe, 8 years ago, after spending a decade working for Chicago Public Media. I want to tell you a story about sort of the potential dangers of philanthropy. And then, of course, during the Q&A, I can respond to questions about sort of how we generate more philanthropic investment for journalism. When I was at Chicago Public Media, I was responsible for individual giving, corporate sponsorship, and philanthropy. So I was the guy who had to raise most of the money. The Chicago Community Trust had been a funder of WBEZ, which is the NPR affiliate here in Chicago, for about 19 years. They funded a program, the trust, that called Chicago Matters, and it supported investigative journalism. Each year there was a topic picked, and there was about $3 to $4 million sort of put into local journalists to sort of cover that topic. So multiple grantees covering a single issue. Award-winning program. I received a call 2 years before I left WBEZ to join the Chicago Community Trust from the trust. So I'm working at BZ, and now I'm working for the trust, but I'm receiving this call in my capacity at BZ. And I was told that the program, which was then, again, 19 years old, was going to be canceled. And that led to sort of one of the most sort of traumatic moments of my career, because we were expecting the check actually that quarter. And again, we received about $1 million a year to support this journalism, which supported 3 editors, a couple reporters, etc. And so I had to actually, after getting that call, confirming that the trust was in fact going to discontinue its journalism funding, I had to lay off staff. It was the first time in my career I've actually had to do that. So I remember it, and anybody who's worked in management probably can understand, how challenging those moments are. A few years later, I was recruited to join the Chicago Community Trust as Chief Marketing Officer. Again, most of my career, I've been raising money and working on the marketing development side. And I decided to join the Community Foundation. And quietly, I didn't say this to my then CEO, I was going to find out why in the hell did the Chicago Community Trust cancel Chicago Matters? Because we'd never heard the why. I found out, I'm not going to name names because this is a public event, but I found out that one of the trust board members at the time, which happened to be an owner of one of the local newspapers, killed the program. And I was told by a person who was also on that board, and this is our governing board, that when he saw the package, so when you're on the board of a foundation, you get a package of grant recommendations. And he said openly to the other board members, why in the hell are we funding my competitors? Again, he owned the local paper. I share that story because for 2 reasons. One, having philanthropy interested in journalism is a good thing, but we also have to understand the challenges of philanthropy. And I share that story again because that was an example of someone with an enormous amount of power being able to, in a moment, sort of shift the winds of our institution, and quite frankly, undermine the public good. A program that was providing good information to residents of our city was gone in a moment's notice. So again, I made it my commitment when I came to the trust to stand up, or sort of restart, if you will, the journalism work. An opportunity came when we switched CEOs, and we started to develop a new strategic direction. And I won't go into all the details, but we, as a community foundation, have a North Star goal, which is to close the racial and ethnic wealth gap in the Chicago region. Yes, that's a hairy, audacious goal, but it set our institution on a path to think differently about how we do sort of our work, how we show up as a philanthropy. As part of that conversation, I advocated, and I'm going to use the I statement intentionally because I felt alone oftentimes in this advocacy, that no matter what the foundation chose to focus on, be it closing the wealth gap, be it economic development, workforce development, no matter what our North Star goal ultimately would be, we needed to create the conditions to drive a greater civic participation in our community, and particularly in Black and Latinx communities, or BIPOC communities, which is, Black, Indigenous, people of color. And that work had to include funding journalism. And funding journalism, they did a couple of things. And again, this is very much what Tracie's doing with Pivot Fund. Center equity, and be issue agnostic. The philanthropy had to seek to sort of create infrastructure capacity, for the work to be done. And I share those sort of top line sort of non-negotiables with you because, again, I want to go back to the story. When I was advocating for journalism, most folks in philanthropy said, yeah, that's good, we should fund journalism. But the next statement would always end up being, we should fund them to cover the things that we care about. So that you have the donor saying, I care about this issue, I'm going to fund Seamus and Block Club Chicago to cover violence. I'm going to fund WBEZ to cover transportation. And again, what I've been trying to do in my position of influence at the trust is sort of challenge that orthodoxy and create a new one. Like if you're a community foundation and you want the community that you serve to be healthy, you need a healthy information economy. You need journalists to be out there doing the work. And you need to support, and this is another point that one of my non-negotiables is that while we center equity, we needed to make sure that the entire sort of ecosystem of journalism was paid attention to. So last point, we fund community-centered media platforms. We fund nonprofits, we fund for-profits. We fund the regional players like WBEZ, the city-centric players at the neighborhood level like Block Club Chicago. We fund documentary film. We fund civic storytellers. And we do all that with this spirit that we want, again, the ecology to be healthy, but we also want to encourage more collaboration.
Quick question, what sort of annual budget is going into media and journalism from the Chicago Community Trust, just to make us all really, really jealous here?
Well, no, right now it's about $3 million now, but let me put a caveat on that. The potential is great. We have about $600 million of grants flow through the trust each year through our donor base. And again, we've just stood this program up 2 years ago, and some of our almost 2.5 years ago now. And because of some activity in our marketplace here, we're getting more interest from the donors who actually have funds, philanthropic funds housed at the trust. So my role is not just to sort of adjudicate our discretionary budget and push it out the door, but my job at the Community Foundation is to influence other donors who rely on the trust to help guide their philanthropic strategies. And many of those donors are now becoming more interested, as was noted earlier, in funding journalism.
Yep. And one more quick question, the chair's privilege to ask a question. If you were advising when you advise the organizations in the community, the media organizations, what's the one thing they should do better to get philanthropic funding that isn't dangerous, that is neutral? What should they be telling their impact story better, or what are they not doing well enough to justify getting this money?
Again, my context is Chicago, and I think our in Chicago, our for-profit and nonprofit players do a good job of doing their work and telling their story. I actually think, let me just say this, I think it's philanthropy's job to go out and find the folks doing the work. And then oftentimes you sit in these environments and say, well, what should the nonprofit do, to get the attention of philanthropy? And I think that's, again, an orthodoxy that needs to be challenged. And I'm working to do that. Now, that said, you're trying to raise money, right? And so I tell folks, be aggressive, particularly those smaller outlets that are startups, particularly those that are led by BIPOC leaders. You have to be aggressive. Now, and let me just say this, Caroline, one of the challenges, and I'm dealing with this head on, there's an infrastructure built for some legacy media that, yes, is nonprofit, but have sort of built up some muscle. So like NPR, again, I love NPR. I worked for NPR for years. I love it. So this is not an indictment, but they have the same type of development muscle that compares to some of our elite universities, like University of Chicago, Harvard, Princeton, Yale. They have capacity to raise money. And these folks are aggressive. And I understand why. I had to do the job. I had a monthly goal. I used to have to raise about $4 million a month when I was at WBEZ. So I understand. So they're very, very aggressive. I'm saying to the smaller players who sometimes aren't as naturally aggressive, be equally aggressive. I'm also saying to philanthropy, don't be lazy. I was going to curse. I'm sorry. I had to catch myself. Don't be lazy. Don't just respond to the inbound, and don't just respond to the inbound that may feel new, but they're spinoff of sort of existing infrastructure. So Seamus was mentioning earlier, there are a lot of folks starting nonprofit platforms. Many of these folks have connections into the corporate world of media, corporate media world. They came of age in that infrastructure. They have lots of social capital, and that's great. And again, you should engage, but don't stop there. And so I spent a lot of time working with my team at the Trust, saying we got to go out and find the people we should be funding, and that should be again a new mindset of philanthropy.
Oh, I'm gonna have to stop you there.
Okay.
Because we've got 2 more speakers in this session who are just, including Vince. Thank you so much. Stay with us. We'll come back to you with more questions. Can you stay with us? Yeah. Okay, so we're going to move now to Padma Priya. Padma has very kindly stepped in because Sunil, who was going to be speaking, has got COVID really badly and is not very well at all. So Padma is going to speak about what it's like to be on the receiving end of investment, but also to tell the story of Suno India. Over to you, Padma, and good luck with your speech.
Thank you so much, Caroline, for having me here. And it's really fantastic to hear all the speakers so far and so inspiring. And, I thought that I was the only crazy one out there doing crazy things. So it's really good to be in good company of other crazy people who are in this sector. So hi, everyone. I'm Padma Priya. I'm based in Hyderabad, India, and I'm the co-founder, editor-in-chief of Suno India, which basically means Listen Up India. And we are a podcast-only media platform, digital media platform, and we have so far over 24 shows in 4 different languages. And our focus, our vision is to report on underreported and underserved issues. And we are like a 3-year-old startup. So yeah, I'm from the startup space. We are not a nonprofit. It's really difficult to be a nonprofit in India. It's easier to be a for-profit in India. So we are a for-profit company doing no profit. Just for the sake of setup, we are a for-profit. And yeah, so just a little bit in terms of Suno India. So when we started off with one podcast, which was on child adoption, called Dear Pari. And the idea was to sort of bring the story. So adoption is a very taboo topic still in India, and we have a daughter whom we have adopted. And one of the things that we noticed was that there was a very little to no conversation around adoption in India, and we thought, let's take this. And that's how, when we got the idea of Suno India, we thought, let's start off with this because it was something very close to us, and we wanted to root it in the whole spirit of storytelling idea. And that's how Dear Pari was born. Pari is the nickname that we have for our daughter. And that took off pretty well. And, we took that idea and we went to IPSMF, which is the Independent Public Spirited Media Foundation here in India. And they were like, oh yeah, this sounds like a great idea, but this sounds more like a passion project. Come back to us with proof of concept. Now, all the 3 co-founders, none of us had any sort of background in business management, fundraising. All 3 of us come from very different facets. So the other co-founder is my husband, my partner. He comes from a climate change advocacy background, and the other co-founder is Tarun Nirvan. He was my colleague at Doctors Without Borders, and he's the digital person, the digital lead, and the brain behind all the tech things for us. And so we were like, okay, so we need to prove this concept. And, we had a great idea, but how do you sort of implement it? And, it was 2019, it was the Indian elections, very crazy time. And we thought, okay, what better way to prove this concept than to launch podcasts in 3 different languages on elections in India. And so that's what we did. We collaborated with people. We tied up with The Wire, which had by then been a pretty established player in the digital media space, to launch a Urdu podcast. And then we tied up with a local Tamil podcaster. Tamil is another regional language in India. And we tied up with him to launch a region-specific podcast in his language. And another one called the Suno India show, which is now a flagship current affairs show, in which we started off with English, current affairs podcast, and also another one called Every Vote Matters. And the idea behind that was to sort of educate people about how the voting rights even came, because people take it for so much for granted when it comes to elections and sort of voting and so on. So yeah, and that's how we launched our podcast. We went a bit crazy. I think went ahead and launched like 5 podcasts in a span of 2 months. Collaborated with different people. And then, at the end of it, we went to IPSMF and we said, hey, here's a proof of concept. This is what we've been able to do. And it was just 3 of us with 3 other contributors doing it. And we were completely bootstrapped. So we were not really in a position to, and, we went ahead and told people, listen, we'll not be in a position to pay you right now, but here's what we can do for you in return. We could do some consulting work. We could do some other work for you. And luckily people agreed to do this, again, found like-minded people, and that's how we started. And went to IPSMF. We came up with a sort of a business plan with this idea, and we were the first of its kind in India, who was focusing on audio journalism, who was focusing on audio storytelling, but focused only on underreported stories, and with the whole principle of journalism underlying at it. And yeah, we managed to get the grant, get the funding from them, and we are in the 3rd year, which is the final year of the fund. So IPSMF, the whole idea, they sort of believe that there is right now like a crisis in Indian journalism because of the spread of TV news, or we have I think we have 10 or 15 Fox News in India. Sorry if there are any Fox News fans, but just to give you an example. And it's not really a great space in that right now. But then there's also been this whole boom in the digital dawn, right? Like there's been a huge, like there's so much, everybody now almost owns a smartphone, and it's only growing widely. Like, they're what we call as that by 2025, people, they're expecting 500 million Indians to have access to internet, 500 million more Indians to have. So it's like a great space to be in. But it's also the time when media ownership has become really, has gone in the hands of I would only call them capitalists. And but at the same time, there is a space if you want to democratize this media ownership. And IPSMF's vision is to do that, is to support digital media to support digital media grow, and also to sort of reinvent the media in that sense, and also to recognize that the editor's role will always be paramount, and that there has to be media independence. There has to be a credibility for that media, and the editorial values have to be at the core of what drives your mission. And so they have been supporting and funding quite a few public interest journalism ventures in India, digital media foundations. But they do have a cutoff for the grant, and that's usually for the funding, and that's usually 3 years. And the idea being that we all have to figure out a sustainable way of functioning or operationalizing within those 3 years, which I think gives that additional sort of boost and puts, of course, it does put an immense pressure on you as an entrepreneur, like, oh my God, where is the money going to come from during a pandemic? But then, you do have to work hard and see how do you stay true to your vision, how do you stay true to your values, how do you not move away from it. And yeah, that's where we are at right now. We are in our final year, and we recently got selected for a Google News Initiatives Startup Lab, where they selected 10 digital media outlets from India to sort of support them with regards to, again, in terms of sustainability and so on. And I'm also doing a course on literally a management course on, women entrepreneurship and so on. So the idea being that, we hope that by next year, we would have a sustainable model in place, a much more sustainable model in place than what we have right now. Currently, our revenues come apart from the funding. We did manage to get an angel investor on board, and he happens to be a very well-known film producer here in the place where I come from. He had a very successful 3-part franchisee movie called Bahubali. And we went and pitched to him, and he really liked what we were doing, and he's come on board as an angel investor. And we do hope to go and find like-minded investors, because we do realize that that's a tricky part. I mean, it's right now there is a boom of venture capitalists in India, and like a lot of startups are getting money left, right, and center. But for us, it's also very important to find the like-minded kind of investors who will not ask us to sort of dilute our mission and vision, because we're also operating in a very polarized space. Currently, politically speaking, it's a very polarized space right now. India is also facing what I would only call as a democratic crisis right now. And it's really important for us to stay independent and have our voices remain independent. We do hope to move into also the subscription/membership model eventually. But I think there's still some time for that, because content has mainly been fairly free because of internet in India, and it's very difficult to get people to pay for something online as opposed to something which is offline and tangible, like a newspaper or a magazine. So yeah, that's about Suno India in as quickly as I could tell you.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Padma, for jumping in at the last minute. It's so interesting. My question is around the word journalism and news versus storytelling. But then, so did you, when you went and pitched to IPSF, was it fine that you were storytelling as opposed to being a news platform or a journalist platform?
I think we convinced them that storytelling is extremely an important part of journalism. I don't know of any. I mean, some of the most remembered stories that for us as a reader or as a consumer are based in the whole idea of storytelling. Like we will remember, like I will remember a serial podcast just because of the way it was told, or I'll remember a long form article from LA Times, for example, just because of the way it was told, the way it was written. So I think it was not very difficult to convince them on that at all, actually.
Were you surprised that they were putting 3 years of funding into a for-profit, even though they are IPSMF is a charitable foundation?
I mean, honestly, I heard about them through another digital media platform, and when I looked up on their website, and I had sent in the initial inquiry. I think that was my first question: do you support for profits? And actually, it does say that, and yeah, I was pleasantly surprised to hear that. But I think they are very aware of the Indian context in that sense. Like, it's not easy to be a trust or a non-profit and be in the digital media space. Like, I will need to get, like someone was talking about getting additional tax certificates and everything, and that's a very cumbersome process. And again, in India, as a media organization, you cannot take any funding from outside India if you're a charity. So foreign funding. So that sort of would have limited us quite a lot. I mean, now because we were for profit, during the COVID wave, we won 2 grants, one from Internews and one again from Google News Initiative, and we could take that because we were a for profit. So I think they're very aware of the challenges that are there.
Yeah, thank you so much, Padma. And your audience, what's your readership, your listenership rather?
Right now we are at 100,000 listeners per month, spread across all our shows and with very limited marketing budgets. It's been a lot of word of mouth over the last 3 years. We've also received really good support in that sense because all our podcasts are very unique. Almost every podcast is one of its kind in India. They end up being written up in the mainstream media. So we end up, so the mainstream media sort of helps also increase our visibility in that sense.
Right. Lovely. Thank you so much. It's really fantastic. Does anyone have a quick question for Padma? Because I know we're running over time to hear Vince, but this is so wonderful to have you with us, Padma. And it's very late in India, so I don't know how long you can stay. And we'll move on to hear from Vince Stehle now. Vince will tell us all about the amazing platform, organization rather, that he runs.
Yep. Great.
Vince,
well, thank you, Caroline, for
Hi, Vince.
Inviting me to participate. It was great to see you again after your visit to the United States on your Churchill fellowship. So many things to respond to and relate to. It's great to see all the good work that's being supported and done in communities. So our organization, Media Impact Funders, is an association of philanthropic funders who support media in the public interest. That's across a broad range of media forms and formats and different types of funders, mostly US foundation funders, program staff largely, but also trustees and senior executives are also involved in our programming. Individual donors, high net worth individuals to some extent as well, some corporations, some public benefit corporations, etc. But for the most part, we're talking about foundation professionals. And our area of focus has been largely US domestic, but increasingly there is interest among US funders who also have a global view of things. Organizations like the Ford Foundation and the MacArthur Foundation, obviously for a long time, the Gates Foundation, of course, have had a long interest in global activities as well as the US domestic activities as well. And so we reflect all of that. And I'd say over the last year or so, maybe 2 years, we've really had an increase in our network of funders who support international media and journalism as well. So I will say that that's a recent trend and worth focusing on. One of the things that I will say is, we serve that field, but also most of our information is available to media practitioners and anyone in the general public, as well as our funder community. So anyone can go to the website, which I'll post the link to right here in the chat. Most of our information is freely available. Most of our sessions are recorded and you can listen to the presentations, etc., and all of the reports. So hopefully some of that's relevant to your work as well. For myself, I've been running this organization for about 10 years, and I've got a great team. We're about 6 together doing the work. And prior to moving from the board to the staff of Media Impact Funders 10 years ago, I was a grant maker for the Stehle Foundation. And that's a family foundation based in New York, where the family name Andrus, spelled backwards, is Stehle. That's their little secret. They've been doing it for 100 years. And we supported some really interesting media work along the way, including really one of the proudest grants I had was a grant to WBEZ back in the day for the initial funding for a new voice in public radio, Vocalo, which was a really, an experimental kind of thing. It was like more of a hip hop sound, more community oriented sound. Then it was totally alien to the way that public radio was being conducted. And Chicago was such a host of innovation, and WBEZ was one of the most innovative of the NPR stations. So it's great to see so much good work happening out of Chicago, and there's a lot of really pretty revolutionary funders based there as well. Before that, I spent about 10 years at the Stehle Foundation. I was a reporter for the Chronicle of Philanthropy. And in my time there at the Chronicle of Philanthropy, it seemed like we were in a gestation period for the professionalization of philanthropy, much like we are now in the kind of process of professionalization of philanthropic funding for journalism, for the press, for media, a little bit ahead of you here in the United States versus what's happening in the UK and the rest of the world. And so back when I was a reporter for the Chronicle of Philanthropy, I also had a bi-weekly column for something called the Third Sector Report, which some of you may have heard of. I don't know if it's still publishing, but back in the day, I had a column where I was sort of trying to translate what we were doing, maybe just a little ahead of what was going on there. So I think it's a recurring dynamic where we maybe are exploring things here in the United States that can be helpful. And so I would just say, like, I'm familiar with that. I'm available. If people want to reach out, you can reach us through our website, and I'll also post some links to some of the reports. But I'll just say just a few more things specifically. I've heard the story that Daniel talks about of the withdrawing the funding abruptly from the Chicago Community Trust to WBEZ. But every time I hear that story, I continue to be shocked by the abrupt and insensitive way that philanthropy was done in that case. And I think the field has moved to a different place of sensitivity to that. But of course, the people who have the privilege, who have the power, who have the resources, always have the ability to do it badly. And we try to encourage them as a field to do it well. So I'll post a link later to a report that we have. It's a few years old now, but I think it's all still pretty much correct, which is 5 things you should know, 5 things you can do. Our 5 things report, which basically says, here's how you should do it. Do it with sensitivity, do it with integrity. And most importantly, if you're going to be funding journalism, you have to make sure that you're not doing it in an intrusive way, in a way that undermines the integrity of the people that you're supporting. And so that's, I think, one of the cardinal rules of philanthropy is not to impose your editorial judgments or expectations in a way that basically you're cutting off your nose to spite your face if you do that, because you waste your money by undermining the integrity of the outlet that you're supporting. And there's much more to say about that as well.
I'd like to ask you the same question that I asked Tracie and Daniel, really, what do you think that the media organizations in this audience and those of us that we're supporting, should be doing better to inspire philanthropists and funders and impact investors as well
to inspire them? I mean, I think that to reach them, to connect with them, I think that there is a growing awareness of US funders and European funders of the urgency of supporting freedom of expression, journalism, etc., in response to some political dynamics and authoritarianism, etc., in the world. I don't know that I have a specific, I mean, you're doing good work. Try to connect with the people who have the resources, who are supporting that work. Everything I've seen so far is inspiring, what Padma was just describing, and it's just making the connections. And hopefully we can all help in
making the connections. I think
showing the path for that.
You could be a fantastic support to us. Questions to any of the panel now, please, from all of you. And Paulomi saying each speaker has been very inspiring. Good work has been done. Innovative ideas shared. Thank you.
Can I just add to the last piece of what you were just saying about, or what Vince was saying? I think it's important for news organizations to actually do a lot better job for philanthropists who are not really familiar with the sector to demonstrate impact. And so what do I mean by impact? We need to be able to show these philanthropists what change has resulted from the journalism that we provide to these communities. And so I know we've been struggling with that for the last few years because philanthropy is so new to the industry, but I think we're doing a lot better job now. And Seamus has talked about some of what he's been able to do. But I think, being able to make it crystal clear, and Padma alluded to this in her response to me, really making it clear about how you serve your community and how they've been able to benefit from the value that you bring to that community that you're serving or that you're embedded in. And so how do you do that? If you get emails about your coverage, save those, put them in a spreadsheet, share it with your potential donors. If a policy or law gets changed, make sure you write about that, report about that, and share it with your community, those donors are a part of that community and can learn from that. If it leads to, town hall events, or the community organizes itself around some of your reporting, I think we share those stories as well. But it's absolutely critical that we demonstrate the impact so that philanthropists better understand why they need to invest in journalism.
Thank you, Tracie. That's a great place to end this session.
I just want to add to what Tracie was saying in terms of impact. I think one of the things that for us really helped us also in terms of growing our name, or for people to know who Suno India was being very consistent with the kind of work that we were putting out. And I think that's really especially in a medium like podcasting, you have to be consistent. Otherwise, you just vanish within the 100,000 odd podcasts. But the other thing that really worked for us, and this is something that I very, very truly believe in, is that collaborative journalism. I think that's the way to go. I do not look at any digital media platform in India as necessarily as a competitor. I'm always open to, Suno India is always open to partnerships, not just within India, but also from outside India. And I think that's really helped us a lot in terms of growing, and also in terms of just getting some fantastic work out, by working together with other investigative reporters, data journalists, and now building like a network of journalists, independent contributors and others across the country. And the other thing that we've managed to do in terms of impact is in terms of capacity building of journalists in a very new medium. So also helping them pivot into the audio journalism space, helping them understand how they can tell stories in a different way. So if you have somebody who's always been a print journalist, having them pivot to audio is a very is a very interesting curve to watch, and once they fall in love with the medium, just the kind of work that comes in is amazing. So yeah, so there are different ways that you can actually make impact within the journalism community too, and I think that's something that it's very important. I feel we should keep in mind also.
Thank you, Padma. Thank you so much. And we're going to hear a very quick last word from Vince.
And just to thank you, Carolyn. Just to bring your attention up, the things fly by in the chat. So the last item that I posted was our report, Decoding Media Impact, which really tells you a lot of examples of how people are doing that, doing the impact, and the outreach, and assessing the impact as well. So if you want to understand how to do it, there's a lot of resources, not only in the report, but in the related drop down in our page that is a very deep resource on strategies and approaches to impact. But thank you for letting me share those resources.